What's up, everybody? Netman Podcast back tonight. Episode 17, but we're actually going to post this as episode 16. I screwed up in the intro of the last one. Thanks everybody for listening. We got a cool guest tonight, Sean Wieda, owner of Wieda's Marine in Alexandria, Kentucky. They're kind of known nationally as a top ranked boat dealer, sells several different brands. Sean has some great stories. He's a great storyteller, interesting dude, small business guy that kind of bootstrapped the business, and we just think he's an interesting dude and want to talk to him tonight. So if you're liking these guys, please share them with a buddy. Help us grow in some way. We appreciate you listening. And Aaron, you ready to do this tonight?
Not really.
Yeah. Well, I am, man. Let's do it.
No, he's a hammer too, right?
Yes, he's a very respected fisherman. Whitney Stevens, one of our previous guests, has been really good friends with him for a long time, and he pretty much described Sean as a guy that could have been a professional fisherman if he would have pursued it. But he's done really well. I know he's won some BFLs and several like top finishes, and has fished from Kentucky and Ohio here and even further north. And I know he goes clear to Florida and still fishes BFLs and stuff. So
Right.
I'm excited to pick his brain. A couple times I've gotten to chat with him on the phone. He's always gets some good chuckles out of me. So it should be a fun one. I don't know what direction it's going to go, but it'll be interesting to say the least. He's in.
I can't really see myself to see if I'm positioned right enough. So.
You're all right. You're a handsome fella. I know that.
Yeah. Butter up the gas. Get them going. Bad, huh?
Yeah. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing good.
I'm Jesse. I know I've never met you in person. This is Aaron.
What's up,
I
Aaron?
think I told you we started the Great Lakes Fishing Expo a couple years ago. We own it together, and this is just kind of fishing BS to kind of stay relevant and talk to interesting fellas like yourself.
Heck yeah.
So, yeah, thanks, man. Sorry if this was a pain in the rear end for you.
No. I mean, normally I was fishing up at Erie last week and stuff, but no, it's worked out perfect. Good to go.
Were you catching?
We were, but not like by like whack-em standards. The smallmouthing was off for me, but other people did really well. So I don't know what I did wrong. Just picked the wrong place to fish, probably.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to do that up there.
I've been doing that all year.
A lot of options.
Yeah.
Well,
welcome. Yeah, we don't really. I mean, normally we kind of have questions and a format and everything we're trying to get out of you, but really, I mean, we just kind of want to know a little bit about the boat sales and the fishing and and just kind of see where it goes.
I told Aaron this one would kind of just take off, man. I'm interested personally in just, maybe tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how you got into the business you're in and how it got to where it got. And, I think it'll, go from there. We'll be just good. So,
yeah, I can go as deep as you want. I can go how I got into fishing and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, let's run it, man.
I just talk a lot. I'm a talker, so if I get to rambling to where you want to move on to something else, just lead me into something else. You know what I mean?
I'll just put my hand up and hey, I got a question.
Yeah.
Dude, this is an opportunity for you. I mean, we have plans on making this thing big, so we hope this can benefit you someday. But talk as much as you want.
They like my cup.
That's hilarious.
Nice.
But talk as much as you want. We usually go about an hour, and when we get close to that, we'll kind of give you like a, well, man, it's
Yep.
been fun, like and at the end, we usually ask for a little piece of life or fishing advice if you got something. So we'll wrap it up with that. So
Okay.
yeah, dude, thanks for coming on. And how did it all start, man?
Well, so man, you really, going back to the very beginning. Okay. Fishing. I tell you what, I was in probably middle school, and I met this guy named Brandon Sample, who I still know to this day. And it was just one of those things where it was brother from another mother kind of thing. And this guy and me were just best friends as little kids. I don't know how old we were in middle school. I'm guessing probably somewhere in the like 8 years old range. And we become buddies and stuff, and we played sports together. And then I always kind of did just like being in the woods and stuff. I grew up in the country, and then my dad died when I was really young, around that time period, about 8. So we kind of moved from, basically my mom lost the farm. We moved from the farm, moved to a apartment kind of in the inner city, and it was a major, major culture shock for me. And, I kind of was only there for a little while, and then we kind of moved to a different school. And this Brandon guy was one of the first guys I met. So his grandma had some farms and some ponds and stuff, and I always loved the outdoors. So just catching frogs, I love catching frogs, snakes. I'd bring that stuff home and have in my pocket. And he's like, one time, I got a better way to catch these frogs, because we were just catching with our hands, or a gig at the best. And he's like, check this out. And he get a little spin cast reel, and he had little meps, the old fox or a squirrel tail ones. You know what I mean?
Yep. Oh
Yep.
yeah.
He'd flick that little squirrel tail, rooster tail, whatever meps out there on that moss, and twitching along, that frog would eat it. And then he could, reel the frog in, get the excitement of fighting the frog. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. So he set me up, and I mean, when I was growing up, they didn't have the Snoopy pole, but what they had is they all had these little spin cast reels. They were either blue or brown, and had little pictures of little whales on them. You know what I mean? Little.
Yep. I remember those.
Yes, and they were junk, but that's what we had. I'm all rigged up. Like I said, I'm about 9 years old. I'm running around the pond, and I hadn't really done any fishing. I mean, maybe I went bluegill fishing or something. But I didn't remember when my dad, when I was, he's still alive. So I go along, and I see this fish, and it's springtime. It's like probably like late May, and this fish is just swimming around. And I'm yelling at my buddy. I'm like, "There's a giant fish over here," and he's like, he fished, so he's like, "Well, catch it, catch it." And he's kind of too far on the other side of the pond. So that bass, of course, now we know it was on a bed, but I was just like, it won't move. And I took that little rooster tail out, and I was still struggling to cast and push the button and everything, and I jiggled. I actually did a figure eight, but I didn't know what I was doing. I did a little figure eight on top of that bed. That bass came up there, grabbed the old squirrel tail, and buddy, the fight was on. Of course, I didn't quite understand the cranking and the pulling, so I just grabbed the rod and ran the other way up the bank. And I drug this bass, which I don't know if that bass was 15 pounds or 15 ounces. To me, it was the biggest giant bass in the world, and it basically just hooked me for life, man. I was
That
hooked
was the
for life,
one.
and there was no stopping it after that. That's all I could think about was fishing, and I still think about fishing to this day, every minute of the day.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's a good one, man.
Yeah, and I think most of us have that first fish memory
One
that
core
we
memory.
knew we were hooked, or we were hooked. Yeah, mine was a
Mhm.
carp that could have been 15 pounds or 15 ounces, and I was probably 6.
We talked about this. Mine was catching channel cats with dad, and the squawking of them. You know how the little squealers talk. That for whatever reason, that's my first like real memory of catching fish, and it's weird how that stuff just stays so vivid. But um, so that's a young kid. Take us. take us a little older, leading into where'd the boat thing come into play?
Well, from the little kid thing, I got into fishing. Never had a boat. My mom couldn't afford a boat or anything, but we had the
Right.
park. These in southern Ohio, we had what's called the Hamilton County Park Lakes. You could rent
Hmm.
rowboats. So I started renting rowboats. I was flat oaring around, catching bass, and then I got kind of known as this kid on the lake. They'd let me go out in these boats without, you're supposed to have like a 16-year-old guardian, but I was there all the time. They let me go. So I got into that. I'll fast forward kind of a lot of the guys who fish the BFLs and stuff would go to these lakes, fish these little tournaments on these rowboat lakes. They'd show up with trolling motors and stuff. They kind of took me under their wing. I kind of started meeting some real bass fishermen and got into tournament fishing. Okay. So didn't know what I was going to do. I was in high school fishing tournaments. My grandfather was, a contractor, tradesman, kind of knew all the different bricklayer by trade. He was kind of like probably just, it was unfortunate. He was almost too old to really learn from me. I was just kind of learning from him and was basically just, doing general labor on jobs with him. And that's what I kind of thought I would get into. I thought I'd be in construction, and I started out in that, and was trying to go to school a little bit. And it was hard, because we'd leave early in the morning and go work, and I try to take night classes and do stuff. This was after high school and stuff. So my mother got sick, and we had a small family. I had to kind of take care of her, and I couldn't travel and like get up and leave at 3 or 4 in the morning to go to these jobs and stuff. So I took a job at a small marina down in Kentucky. It was called Ellesmere Marine, and I basically was hired on to general clean the boats, work the counter, just general labor, whatever around the shop, and I've always been, a people person. I like people. I like talking. I probably talk too much, and so it wasn't very long. He's like, you need to try to sell some of these boats, and of course, it sounded good to me. And about that time, that little place, which was a real small kind of mom and pop, and I mean, it was literally like it was like an old house, and there was a living room upstairs. And, some of y'all listening to this might know exactly where I was talking about, but they got bought out, and some folks came in and built a big business, and I worked for them for 6 or 7 years, and the whole time I just never really liked how things were done. I always thought that you know I, this could be so much better, if it was thought through by a fisherman. By then I'm fully immersed. I'm probably in my 20s, and I mean I'm fully immersed in bass fishing and tournaments and BFLs or Redmans or whatever. And I knew as a bass fisherman, kind of, let's face it, we can be kind of demanding people and service and just personalized. I know when I was young, I would go in to some of these boat shops and various places, and it was just, it was a bunch of old guys sitting around. You'd come in all bright eyed and starry eyed, and hey, where are the fish biting guys? And and where'd you catch your fish at? Right here in the mouth, boy.
Oh yeah.
And nobody really paid the time of day. So I always thought, man, like, you just kind of give people a little respect and a little attention. It goes a long way. So I kind of had this desire, like, I really would like to do this different, do it on my own, but there was no opportunity there. And then in 2008, as everyone knows, the world fell apart for many
Yeah.
businesses, many people in 2008, right? It's not a good time for a lot of people.
Mm-mm.
And so the place that I was working for, they went out of business, and they closed up. And it was a bad deal. There was a lot of people that were like, man, what do I do? They had boats. A lot of people, like I knew, were losing their businesses. They were losing their jobs, and they needed to sell their boat. Okay, they needed a way to move their boat and sell them. And so a lot of them approached me, knowing I'd been a boat salesman, and a lot of them had bought the boat from me, and so on and so forth. And I didn't really have any resources. Okay, just wasn't sitting on a pile of cash and just was working, had a decent paying job, but didn't have any you know, business resources, but I kind of knew how everything worked, if that makes sense. I knew how it worked.
Yeah.
I knew how I could improve it. And so a lot of it was, man, I had a lot of friends and a lot of people that like my first shop. I got a guy who's friends with me this day, and he's a customer of mine, and he had a discount tobacco store, like where you buy discount, tobacco, but he sold baits and he had live bait and stuff like that. And he had a little room. When I say room, it wasn't even as big as my office here. And he had a little lot space. And so I kind of put a business plan together on paper, how I would do this, and I would sell boats for people, on consignment, and I'd get a mechanic, and we'd start doing some service, and I'd do the service myself. And I mean, he basically rented me this little room, okay, for next to nothing because he just, I think, felt sorry for me and wanted to see me do something. And we tried it. I think it was around 2009, I think, is when this was going on. Okay. And if you can imagine, this is a very small, very basic shop, and there's really no income stream. And so it was very difficult. And, it really wasn't working very well. And I remember a turning point was, and I'll try not to dramatize this, but this is pretty close to the truth. At the time, too, let me backtrack a little bit. So at the time, it was me. And we were selling boats. We were selling some boats on consignment. We were doing a few little odd and end repairs and, you know, selling used trolling motors and things like that. But we just had me, and then I have a guy named Richie Young, okay? And Richie and me worked together at the other store, and I'll never forget it. Richie had gotten a job at Bass Pro, and Richie's kind of for anybody that knows Richie, he's a free spirit. He's not kind of like a corporate America go in and he's not that kind of guy. So I go up there one day to Bass Pro when I'm in the middle of this starting this business and been open about a month, and I see him up there, and he's just, I can tell he doesn't like it. You know what I mean? And I said, here's my plan. And I said, I don't even know what I can pay you or how it's going to work out. But I said, will you come work for me? I know you're the only other person I know that I know knows how to sell these boats as good as me, and people respect you and like you and everything. So he said, let me think about it. And I said, okay, well, I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. And he says, I'll do it. So he tells me right there on the spot, and Richie came to work. I don't think he even did his 2 week notice. Shame on him, but he came to work for me the next morning. And so I had a little more, help there, and
Yeah.
we could rig some boats and do some things. And without dragging this on forever, here was my lowest point when I opened Wieda's Marine. So it got kind of going a little bit, right? And then, I had a mechanic and cash flow and things started kind of getting kind of weird. And it came down to where it really just wasn't going to work. And I was majorly in the hole. You know what I mean? And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she was very supportive of it, which I wouldn't. I mean, I'm surprised she was, because, I was racking up debt and it just wasn't going anywhere. And, it got down to where we had a guy who's a friend of mine to the day now that needed to sell a boat, and he's like, "Look, I need this much for the boat. If you can get any little thing over top of it, it's fine. Keep it, And I said, "Okay, that's fine." And we had the boat sold and ready to sell. And I told myself that I was so far in the negative. If I went any more negative, I was done. That's it. I'm finished. And just discussed it with her and discussed it with Rick. Plan. Everyone knew it's not working out. This really isn't feasible for whatever reason. And gentleman showed up to buy this boat, and I don't remember why he didn't take it, but he didn't take it. That's just common. People show up and for whatever reason they don't like it. The boat was spotless, and So I said, man, it's not meant to be. And then I remember that, and this is one of these things like it was almost like a sign or something. So we were with this guy for hours showing him this boat, me and Richie. Okay. And, he changes his mind, doesn't want the boat. And I hadn't had anything to eat all day. And I think I had like a Snickers bar or something like that I'd left on my desk. And I was like, well, it's like, man, I got to get something in me. You know what I mean? I'm getting lightheaded. I'll never forget, I go back and that Snicker bar is gone. And over in the corner, a mouse had drug that half-eaten Snicker bar off onto it. And I'm like, man, I'm defeated. You know what I mean?
Talk about kicking you while you're
That's a
down.
bad
Yeah, I
omen.
can't even get a half Snickers bar. So, we kind of had this was like maybe 6 months into it, and I just said, okay, it's fine. I gotta go do something else, and went home that night, and I said I'm gonna go in and settle up with my lease, my rent, and pay my friend for the rent money and all that, and then I'm gonna just call it quits, And I went in there the next morning, and I'm cleaning everything out, doing everything, and this gentleman probably had to be in his 80s. He had to be in his 80s, right? And he comes in and he says, I saw you got a nice bullet bass boat out there, you know? And I said, yes, sir, I do. I've got it. And he said, well, I'd like to look at it, And, you never judge a book by its cover, but I'm thinking, this is not the guy that probably needs a bullet bass boat.
Another tire kicker, yeah.
So he comes in and he looks at it for hours. I mean, hours. You know what I mean? And I'm just being polite and nice and how much do you want for it? And I said, well, I told him, and he said, he said, I'll be back in the morning with some money. And I, kind of, well, yes, sir. I'm thinking, yeah, no, you know, he I didn't even almost go in the next day because I got everything cleaned out. And then I said, okay, I'll just program, to respect my commitments or whatever. I told him, man, I'd be here, so I'm going to be here. Well, I went in the next morning and he showed up. And he had whatever the boat was, cash in a paper bag. And I said, sir, I'm really excited that you want this boat. And I said, can you handle this? And he said, well, he said, I've had Allisons and I've had Bullets and stuff. And I said, I know, but I said, it's a lot of boat. I said, do you have somebody that'll go with you and help you use this boat? It's a lot of boat. And I know, I appreciate your buying it, but I don't want to see you get, basically, I'm not trying to say that, but I'm trying to say, I don't want to see you get hurt. You know what I mean? He said, son, he says, be honest with you, I'll never put this in the water. And I said, well, then why are you buying it? He says, just so I know it's in the garage. And he said, I can, make me feel that I could if I wanted to. And I said, well, that's a lot of money to spend for that. He says, I know, but it's what I want. And he bought that boat and continued on the next month's rent. And then it just seemed like everything started clicking from that moment on. Everything started clicking, got some cash flow going, got approached by a major boat company that allowed me to get going with circumventing probably a lot of the rules at the time, that there was a lot of things that I probably needed to put up leverage wise that I got lucky and didn't have to. And
Yeah.
man, the rest was it just clicked from there. And it's kind of been a roller coaster ever since, man.
Yeah, that's dude, that's like one of those, you know, I think Aaron, well, all three of us work in sales in a way, so we can appreciate that. But like, that's like, you got to be super proud, man. That's like the freaking true American story of if you grind your ass off, you'll make it eventually. And it's weird how little things like that one deal, just broke you over, like when you were about to go the other direction. Really cool story, man. Really cool story.
It is, and it's just humbling that that we stuck with it. And I'm always a firm believer because in the boat business, honestly, it looks very glamorous probably from afar, but
Right.
it's a very tough business. It's a high overhead, low margin
Yeah.
business. You sell these big giant boats and everybody thinks it's just unbelievable, but there's so much in this day and age with techs, training, materials, floor plans. It's very, very cost heavy. But I'm a firm believer in that, like, if you really look at your successful boat dealerships, you usually have a passionate owner and or crew that fishes, and they understand
Yes.
it because it's one of those businesses. If you're not truly passionate about it, you know what I mean. You can come in and you can write all the checks you want, but you can't fake that passion. And your customers, I mean, we're all the same. I'm one of them, so they can smell that from a long way away.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and especially as bass guys that like Jesse and I both have a little bit older boats, and I mean we've been window shopping for new boats for the last few years, and like I go in there and I'm like, well, tell me about this boat. Like, what makes this Skeeter better than this Phoenix, or this whatever better than this boat? And like you said, if it's a sales guy that doesn't fish, like all he can do is read me the catalog.
Yeah.
And so like that's not going to sell someone like me who is in sales and fishes. Like like I want to know about the boat. And if you haven't been on the water with it, or you don't have customers just raving about it, like that's no help to me.
Sean, how is the boat industry in general right now? Like, is it?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I cut off.
No, I just kind of ended it with like, just how is it? I'm just curious, I guess.
So it's like a roller coaster, okay? And sometimes that roller coaster is fun to ride, and sometimes it makes you sick. This year's really good, but the bass boat business, the one thing I'll say about the bass boat business, and this goes back to me starting in 2009. No matter how bad the economy is, bass fishermen they're gonna bass fish. Okay,
Right.
it's been proven. It's been proven in 2008. It's been proven. The not the last 2023 was kind of a bad year, and the 24 the election.
Right.
People will fish, and when people fish, they tear things up and they want things fixed. And if they can't buy or don't want to spend the money on the new stuff, they're going to buy used stuff. They're going to fix up their old stuff. So we've always been lucky that you kind of have the service and the parts sales to make up for when the sales are down. Boat sales, I think that people would be amazed if they knew how many high end bass boats are sold every day.
Yeah.
And you guys are what I call good old boys. We're you go to your Tuesday nighter, okay?
Yep.
We know the guys. We know Freddie's got his Stratus still, and so's got this. But you would not believe how many people buy a brand new $100,000 bass boat and they don't fish tournaments and they want something nice. They work very hard for the money. They want something to you know like the old fellow. They want to have it in the garage and know it. And so a lot of these boats that are sold, you never see your buddy get them. Your buddy doesn't get them. There's
Yeah.
guys that really want a new boat. Um,
Yep.
the price of the boat is we don't like that. I hear people complain. That's everyone online. The boats are crazy. The boats are crazy. They're ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I'll be the first to say it. But so is a luxury pickup truck. So is a
Yeah.
cheeseburger. So is everything. And bass fishermen just are the type of people we kind of always want to you know, change it up, get something new, upgrade our old stuff. And I think because of that, the bass boat business for me has always been manageable. Even when it was bad, it's always manageable because there's always people wanting to do stuff.
Yeah. That makes sense. Like, saying that, like you were kind of just speaking on prices and stuff. Like, what kind of advice do you have for, like, no, say a 20-year-old kid comes in there and he's, at least at the time, got a good enough paying job and a good enough credit. Um, but deep down, like, this kid might be getting himself in too deep. Like, is there like a specific package or price range you try to guide a kid like that? Instead of just going all, the kid's wound up, wants to go all in. How do you approach something like that?
Well, you always have to be careful of telling another man how to spend his money, or another woman how to
True.
spend their money, because everyone has their own wallet. But there are times that I think, we have said, you might be able to get a lot more what you want in a used boat. Um, I think, like, even me, I think a lot of people think like new boat, new boat, new boat. You got to understand, 50% of our sales are used boats. It's just the
Yeah.
new boats, all the glory, all the advertising, all the stuff you see is always new boats. But I definitely think that you shouldn't buy more boat than you're comfortable. That's going to put you in a bind to where you're not able to go enjoy fishing. Okay, you don't want to take
Exactly.
too much payment to where now you've got this boat, but you're not able to enjoy it. You know.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to hear you say for maybe a kid that was listening to this, to just, there will come a point in your life when you can probably buy that 80, $100,000 bass boat, but I try to tell a bunch of kids, like, hey, this can be a process of progress, like because naturally, dude, we see it as a younger kid, and you're like, dude, I want that. Like, that dude looks like a freaking machine in that thing or whatever. But
I think it's
um,
I think it's good too for I have a son. Okay, obviously he's going to have access to boats. I'm not going to let him have a boat. I'm
right,
going to let him have. I want to make sure it's safe, but I don't want him to have a used boat that. How do I say it? Most all of us started out with a boat we had to work on. Okay, I don't think
The old
a man can
force
still
outboard.
do.
well, you never stop working on a boat. I don't care if you got a 2026, you're still working on it. But what I'm saying is, I grew up where half the fight of fishing was, you know, is my outboard going to start?
Yeah,
Yep.
How
yeah,
long is this thing going to flood out for? How more times is my motor guide trolling motor going to break? You know what I mean? Um,
yeah,
and it builds character and it builds appreciation for the things that you have, and it builds. I don't know. I think it's good to deal with a little bit of hardships fishing, especially in this day and age where we have so much technology, so much
yeah.
information. It's good to build a little grit and grind.
Yeah. I think in general, man, these kids, which I have girls, but gosh, I try to fabricate a little bit of adversity in their life, because these kids have it, everything at the palm of their hands these days. But yeah, dude, like, that's it. I had a little 16-foot V bottom John boat, and I had the whole kit in there with vice grips and extra zip. You can do anything with zip ties in a boat, and something was breaking every trip. I mean, with my first boat, I knew it was going to happen, and you were the same way, and I'm sure, Aaron, you were the same way.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
how I actually ended up in the boat I'm in. Took my wife out, and the old force outboard wouldn't crank, and she said, "Well, maybe you should be looking for a new boat." I said, "Deal." So the next day, I had one in mind, and I went and looked at it.
Yeah, heck yeah, yeah. It's just and I don't know. There's so much, and I don't know. I don't want to get into the live scope thing too much because I just feel like every podcast in the world's talking about it. But I've got super mixed feelings about it. I mean, I'm definitely on a personal level, and I'm old school, man. I'm just, I'm that guy. Like I'm Gen X. I don't, I don't want live scope, man. I want to fish, dirt shallow and stuff. But
Before, if I can stop you real quick, before we jump into that, um, let's talk about the evolution in the last 15, 20 years of boats and electronics. And and how, for me, it seems like it's just evolving at an incredible rate, um, including the forward-facing sonar. So, what are you seeing on the dealer side of things?
Well, I mean, kind of like, we kind of like circle back to that pricing thing. What a lot of people got to realize is on the pricing on these boats, which is, so everyone understands, that is not the dealer, that is the manufacturer that dictates all of that for the most part. But you got to understand, like, we go back to 2001 even, or, you didn't have a lot of the things that boats have. You didn't have power poles. There's $3,000 to $6,000. You didn't have four graphs. There's $5,000 to $20,000. You know what I mean? You didn't have four-stroke outboards. You didn't have onboard battery chargers all the time. You have all this extra equipment that's beyond the hull adds it. Now, what do I think? I think they're building better bass. I mean, the bass boats that we have nowadays, okay, for the most part, the longevity of how long they're going to last, the quality of how they're built, the the ride is the biggest thing, in my opinion, that has been improved so much in bass boats. I don't care what brand of bass boat you have. You go back into some of the '90s models boats or the '80s models boats, man. They just beat you up,
Yeah.
and some of us that fished a lot that aren't even pros. I mean, I've still got some problems from beating around in boats, from when I was younger and a little more reckless, that it's just these modern boats, they're so much nicer, smoother, ride better. They've got so much more comforts and stuff. Evolution of boats, I think the only thing that we went backwards on is we went backwards on speed. Um, I mean, most of the modern boats, if you get a boat that runs 70, is it's pretty fast. And we had boats in the '90s and the stuff, and a lot of go fast boats that ran a lot quicker than that. Um,
Yeah.
it's probably a good thing. Honestly, I think a lot of us, we don't need to go that fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's an example of what you just said, Sean. Like with the pricing of everything, it pretty much sums it all up. Which it's been, 15 years ago. I was in my early mid 20s, and I bought my first real bass boat, about a 17-foot Cajun with a 95 Johnson Fast Strike on it, and I paid $4,000 for that boat, and now that's how much a trolling motor costs. So
That boat's
that's
more than
that's
$4,000 now.
right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But I hated working on that thing, and I only had two little holes to get these big old arms down in the back. That would cut me up with fiberglass. Never again. Never again. But where were go ahead.
Yeah, and so, like, my boat, I think it's going on 7 or 8 years that I've owned it, and I paid 13,000 for it. It's an old Nitro. And like you were saying, like, we're just constantly doing things to our boats. And I think just everything I've added to my boat is probably worth more than the boat,
Yeah.
between
Probably,
power
for
poles
sure.
and live scope and uh, 4 screens, and I mean, new onboard charger, you name it. Like, and so, like you said, like, that stuff adds up quick. But then when you're already putting it on a new boat, like, that price just continues to grow. But it's not that there's not an added value there, because um, now you can see the bottom contours, or in that case the live scope. You can actually see the fish better than you've ever been able to do in the past. Um, or I mean, just anchoring down to fish a bed. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, the technology is just night
it's
and day
crazy.
difference. Yeah.
A lot
Uh,
of conveniences.
yeah, you don't
Yeah.
you don't think it could get any better, and then it keeps, things keep happening. Just out of curiosity, Sean, what kind of boat or what brand do you run? I know you sell several different ones. Do you run a different one every year, or do you?
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
definitely fortunate in the business with the ability to change boats often, but I typically, I ran a Skeeter. I think my first nice boat was a Skeeter, and they've been very good to me throughout the years. So I normally run a Skeeter. Obviously we sell very popular brand. Phoenix is by far our most popular brand. We have Icon, and we have Camus, and we have Bass Cat, and those all have their unique followings. I still like my Skeeter. It's always suited me well, and how I like to fish, float shallow, and got a low gunnels, for flipping and being aggressive up
Yeah.
shallow.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I think, all of the new boats these days are pretty awesome. Some probably have better options than others with certain things, but I want to get back to this live scope. I
Yeah, I was
want
gonna say that's a good segue.
to yeah. Would you think we'd be all better off without it, or do you think it's hurting the tournament aspect of things, or
I think, like,
what?
I always have to be careful when I answer this. So here's my thing,
I
and
agree.
I think sometimes that you know there's an old saying: just because you can doesn't mean you should. Okay. Um, Live scope and everything that go with it is a huge part of my business. I mean, if I couldn't sell any boats and I just had to survive off my rigging, it would support feed my families. My employees feed their families. Keep them going, keep me. To be enough to keep everybody going. So, like, it's a big part of my business. But taking that personal agenda aside, I don't know. I think we opened up Pandora's box. It's just the thing about fishing is it's the anticipation of the unknown. Okay? And you can say the same
Yes.
thing about trail cameras versus just going out and sitting in a tree. But there's really nothing in the outdoor world that compares to the power of live scope, okay? And these young anglers are absolutely able to master this. And that's a conversation I have. Of course, I'm good friends with Jacob Wheeler. I've known him since he was 13 years old, and I talked to him about this. And Jacob, for the most part, is a old scoper. He's almost, I mean,
Yeah.
he's obviously one of the best fish in the world. But I'm saying from a scoper standpoint, he's probably on the old side of a scoper, and it's um, I had a grandpa that was a fighter pilot in World War II, and he used to talk about how the best pilots were like 19 to 21, and it's because your vision and your ability to make sense of all the chaos around you. It's just, I think the reason we see young people succeeding at this for the most part better is some of it's just physical abilities. They're physically able to, their eyes are able to transmit to their brain faster the dots on the
Yeah.
screen. Okay. And as far as like griping about them having success, no, they're more power to them. They're taking
Yeah.
what's within the rules.
Within the rules all
They're
day long.
masters at it, and they're dominating the sport. Okay. And many of them would probably be very close or maybe where they are, even if there wasn't any live scope. You take like a Trey McKinney. I think if you took live scope away from Trey McKinney's still going to be winning bass tournaments. Okay.
Yes.
He's got it in him. But back to the just because you can doesn't mean you should. I just think that we took away that magic and mystery of fishing. And what we're doing is we're exposing things more and more. I mean, just to be honest with you, fishing has always relied on a little bit of mystery and mystique. We all
Yes.
had a little bit of naivety with us. We all thought we were going to buy you know, that next crankbait that had that certain wobble. It was the next big thing. And we'd throw that out there and a fish bit it, and we thought it was the best crankbait in the world. We didn't know we threw that in the middle of a 200 fish school and one was dumb enough to bite it. So we're exposing some of the magic of fishing, saying, listen, a lot of this is just putting something in front of the fish at the rate of fall and the cadence that they want. And it might not matter if it's a 99-cent minnow or a $40 crankbait, okay? It's about putting it in front of them. And so I think that it's just changed fishing as we know it, and again I applaud the young people that are succeeding with it, or anyone that's succeeding with it. I've used it. I have two live scope. I have two transducers on my boat. I use them
Yeah.
every day. But as we do more and more of this, I just think it just takes a little bit of the diversity away from fishing. It takes a little bit of the excitement. Okay. And one could argue it's the same. Let's be honest. If you watch a 2D, when they were 2D sonar,
Yeah. It's not that different.
it's not that different. But what it's done is it's turned every televised event almost into that. Okay. It
Yes.
doesn't have the entertainment value for the fan. It doesn't have the entertainment value to make that mystique and I just feel that it could take the sport to a place that we don't want to see it go, because we're gonna lose some interest, and I think that we're gaining a lot of young interest, and that makes up for some of it. But a lot of that is on the competitor end and not necessarily on the spectator end. And for every competitor, there's a million spectators buying sponsor products, tuning in,
Yeah.
watching, consuming product. And I know a lot of people that are not watching fishing nearly as
Right.
much because of it. And I'm gonna go one step further. I don't blame that all on live scope. I blame a little bit on it is we have too much to consume fishing. It used to be they filmed a 4-day Bassmaster tournament, and you got to watch after commercials a 40-minute TV show.
And
You
you
on the,
couldn't wait.
couldn't wait, on the edge of
Couldn't
your
wait.
seat. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean I remember sitting there, 10-year-old.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Bob. Hi, I'm Bob Cobb with the Bassmasters. Today, 14 of the toughest fishermen in the state of Arkansas have descended on the state of Arkansas to break down. I mean, it was just so exciting and unique. And I think now you have 24-hour just live coverage
Yes.
from the time they're in the hotel. You got somebody shooting a video that they're in the hotel, someone's going to the toilet, somebody's, frying an egg, and you're watching
Right. They're
every minute of it.
vlogging. Yeah. They've got it all. Yeah.
You're watching
Yeah.
every minute of every second of it, and sometimes I think it's too much, and it's good and it's not good. Sometimes I think would be better to just have a little bit less.
Right. I wanted to speak on. I had a thought when you were talking about like just the live scope stuff, but and you guys may have seen this reel. Gerald Swindle posted a video a couple weeks ago, like where he, going to his tournament, pulled into a campground. There was 5 or 6 kids, just like you or I when we were kids, sitting at the edge of the pond, just sitting there watching their bobbers. And he kind of made a point, like, say this stuff keeps evolving, and you got a wand with a live scope transducer on it that you can see on your cell phone, and them kids have it. Are all those kids still sitting there just watching a bobber if they can see what's out there? And like that hit me, like, that's scary. Like, that's scary. Like, to think about that mystique of it's gone, because where does technology continue to go? Um, but I don't know, like, it just kinda goes along with what you were saying, like, that mystique is like, live scope does take a lot of that away. I have it on my boat, Aaron has it on his boat. We all have it. If you tournament fish, you have to. But, I don't know, it's a weird deal, man, for
Well,
sure.
I think for me, I got started into bass fishing and tournaments a little bit later. Um, and I remember my first any kind of sonar was a little 7-inch Lowrance, and it was just a 2D, didn't have side imaging, didn't have it may have had down imaging, but I remember when I first started fishing, I'd see a return, I'd drop a drop shot down to it, and I'd catch fish. but I was staring at my screen half the time, waiting to see those returns and knowing when and where to drop the bait. And to me, like, it's really not much difference, um, because that's still what we're doing. We're just cruising around scanning, trying to figure out where to cast. But I'd say for me, the biggest benefit of any kind of live scope or forward-facing sonar, whatever you're using, um, is I've been able to learn the body of water better,
Yeah.
figure out where there's laydowns or rock piles or weed edges. Um, and honestly, I probably could have done that with a 360 or something like that, but I was fortunate enough to be able to get a live scope and put it on my boat, and that's just what I use. And Jesse said it before, like, I mean, we catch them like when we see them on live scope, but it's different. Like you were saying, Sean, like these younger guys are just really really good at it, and they're
God.
utilizing the tool a different way than I'm utilizing it.
Yeah.
It really is. I think just like an advantage of youth. Like we don't let our kids have much screen time or video
Screen
games.
time.
But all boys want to play some video games, and he likes playing. My son likes playing some of the Call of Duty games and stuff like that. And it's just they play, and it's like there's just all this stuff going on, and they're playing, and it's just like just watching him. It's like they just respond to that so much quicker than I can. And I'm not that yet, but it's just like you know he's running through 5 levels, and I'm
Oh
I'm
yeah.
making it off the beach, and it's like wow.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
the thing. I think it's good and bad. It's bringing some good things to the sport. It's bringing some bad things to the sport. What I am firm on is they need to either live scope goes and there's no restrictions on it, and you can put as many transducers and do as many things as you want, or live scope is banned and there are no live scopes in these organizations. I think it's either
Or just
A or B.
allow it for practice and not the tournament. Like there's so many different ways you could skin that cat. It's all going to be drama regardless. But
Well, and you know
yeah,
that's something. I'll tell you, just like going another subject. I think it was on my mind to talk about it. And you said drama, and
yeah,
since there's been so much social media and so much attention to bass fishing, I just feel like there is you know constant so much drama in bass fishing. And I think
soap opera.
the one thing that I have been, because I'm around, we're all around fishermen, but just me, I'm around fishermen every minute of every day. And the one thing that I wish that, and as I get older, this means a lot more to me, is I wish bass fishermen could learn to unite more. There's not a lot of other groups of people that have a common hobby that they seem to get along more as a collective organization than bass fishermen do. Whether you're even if you're a kayak carp fisherman, you're a tournament bass fisherman, you're a steelhead walleye fisherman, we're a very small group of people that have very common interests, and we're all kind of guilty. I think fishermen by nature like to complain a lot. Okay. I'm one of them. I mean, I do it too, but I think if fishermen could spend less time fighting amongst themselves over trivialities and spend more time collectively putting their heads together on issues like one big thing like me is aquatic vegetation. I'm real passionate about. I spent a lot of time in Florida in the winter, and eventually I hope to be down there a lot more, and to watch what they have done to those lakes down there is heartbreaking. And I'm not a local that has been there my whole life, but I've been going there my whole life, and it breaks my heart to see what specifically has happened in the state of Florida. And if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, in the state of Florida, they've always treated the aquatic vegetation. There is, to a certain degree, a balance of you can have too much hydrilla in a lake, maybe not for us, but for people who are landowners, water, recreational boaters, okay, it can be too much, okay, and they have a right to use the water, and in many cases, they're actually probably spending more to use the water because they're living on the water and paying property taxes. But the state of Florida, and I won't go into a whole lot of this, what I mean, because I don't want to say something wrong, but I mean, there's definitely some incentives now with these chemical contractors to spray more than is needed. And there is countless documentation of wanton abuse of Florida's waterways spraying these chemicals, okay? And these chemicals they use are, one of them is called diquat, okay? Diquat is linked to uh, several cancers, Parkinson's disease. It's a central nervous system disruptor. It's not good for the fish. It's not good for us. And this stuff winds up in Florida's waters by the millions and millions and millions of gallons a year. Where am I going with all this is, if bass fishermen could one day kind of put some of these differences aside of arguing over live scope and arguing over what brand of boat rides best and arguing over who is winning the tournament because they practice too much or practice too little or whatever, and they could put themselves together as a collective force to combat issues like that, I think we would do ourselves better as a band of brothers and a group of like-minded people than with some of the trivialities that we all argue about.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And like we was talking about on the phone, I think platforms like this, just talking about it and bringing light to it. I worked for the state of Ohio before I you know left and did my job several years ago. And like a typical government contract, they probably you know tell those guys to spray so much, and it's hard to tell. They probably get paid by how much they offload. I mean, I'm not speaking facts, but like
They do 100.
if it's money for them, they're getting rid of the chemicals, and they don't care what it's affecting. Um,
Well, yeah, and you would hope that they'd be in like doing the right thing, but I mean, when money's on the line, that can kind of get murky.
yeah,
But on the same token, like the people that are making the decision, hey, we need to treat this, need to rely on them, I'd imagine, on some level to say, hey, you're the subject matter expert for so many acres. How much product do we need? And they could either give them the truth or they can inflate that for their own pocketbooks. And and they don't really know because they have to rely on them on some level.
the fact of it is, Sean, it's happening right here in Ohio too,
Mosquito Lake.
close to home for us. Yeah, mosquito. Um, I'm not sure that it's happening on Indian, but I mean, I know there's plenty of grass, and I hear it gets sprayed at times. But uh, you know, we got to take some type of action, and you just got to start somewhere with it, because I don't think a lot of the people in political seats quite understand, what it means to someone like us, and how important it
It,
is.
it really is the thing that I think we have to organize about, because you know the landowners and the people that are also using these lakes, I think if you make it about you're killing the fish, to a lot of people, they don't care. They just don't care. Fish don't mean anything to them. You have some people who are, naturalists that don't want to see wildlife being hurt or killed, because it's not just fish. It's the whole food chain that's affected. And really what happens with that is, you know, I've seen a lot of reports, like they had a huge fish kill. They had one several places in Ohio. They've had them in Florida, and what they'll do is they'll test the fish, and they'll say, "Well, this fish did not die from this diquat or copper sulfate or wherever they put it. No, it didn't. The reason the fish die is the chemical kills the vegetation. And as the vegetation goes down on the bottom and decays, it has rapid oxygen loss. Okay. Many of our lakes in Ohio, similar to Florida, are very shallow. When you lose all that oxygen real quick, that's what causes the fish to die. This fish is not dying because it's choking on weed poison. That's not what happens.
Yeah.
But what happens long term is that stuff goes down to the bottom, and everything that starts its life down there in that muck, okay, all your invertebrates, your midges, your whole cycle, all the bases of the food chain, okay, all your things that the shad, the bait fish, the minnows, everything eats on, that all gets poisoned, okay, and that stuff stays down there forever and ever and ever. So going to the public and saying, "Hey, you guys are killing our bass, you're wrecking our bass," they, in a lot of times, probably in their eyes, would rather not even see us out there on their lake at all. But what the concern they need to have is you're disrupting the entire ecosystem. You're disrupting, why don't you see these birds anymore? Why don't you see these otters anymore? Why don't you see these anymore? Okay. But even more important than that, do you want all this toxic sludge sitting there and your dog and your kids and your grandma and your grandpa swimming off the end of your dock in this petri dish of chemicals that our tax dollars are paying to spray into the lakes? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it'd be something good. I hope in my lifetime, I wish I could get a little bit more involved. The people that we really need to depend on in the bass fishing community are, if there's any bass fishermen out there that are attorneys, they're educators, they're people who are used to dealing with government type, procedures and systems, and able to go
The
through that.
lingo and the law. Yeah, the
Those are the kind of
process.
people we really need to help organize, because they're used to, they know how to influence, and they know how to work their way through that. Where, you know, I get angry and say, well, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, and it doesn't do any good. But Ohio has got a lot of tough fishing, and obviously I fish in Ohio, but if you look at your best lakes in Ohio, they got weeds in them.
Yes.
Mosquito
For
is the
now.
best lake we got right now, full of weeds for now.
Yes.
Or it was.
Yes. Yeah.
No
Now
issue.
it's I told you it's a it's a real slippery slope and kind of a double edged sword. I've talked to a couple guys that own a couple of the bigger series here in the state, and like they've approached the state about issues like spraying of the grass, or more boat permits, or there's a certain community of people that are taking way too many fish and not ever getting reprimanded for it. But they said like they get kickback from the state, like with that double edged sword, like, well, we're just going to cut the tournament permits in half, and there's just going to be less people out there fishing for them. So that's the scary thing to a guy like me, like, or you, like, they probably got they probably got a little heated or whatever in the conversation, and the state comes back at you like that, and that's scary for a guy like us. Like, well, take away our little derbies. Well, that's the last thing we want. Um, but there's got to be a way, or someone, or some way to like approach them in a manner where like we can just discuss all of it in some way. But
What would go a long way too is, and I've suggested this a couple times, and years ago I was involved in a couple of these, but a lot of it again is to get the people around the lakes to view the fishermen as a positive thing. Now we know we bring an enormous amount of revenue into these small communities through hotels, through fuel, through lodging, okay? Many of us in the fishing business generate large amounts of money in excise tax that the state, we generate taxes for that, okay? But I had a suggestion one time, and years ago, I did this at a small lake. But I this is something I'm going to put out there. When is the last time? Let's say you got a little local derb on your local little lake. Okay, these homeowners see us. We're zipping around in our boats and banging their docks and everything, and they probably don't always think the best about us. Well, what if you made it a point once or twice a year to have the Tuesday night bass league cleanup? And we all went out on our bass boats, and we all went, and all these homeowners saw us, maybe not on a weeknight, on a Saturday, saw us picking up trash and getting stuff out of the lake. That's the kind of stuff bass fishermen can do to change their image and make us more of a voice where people will listen to us because they see people who are actually doing and trying to help this lake and not just us out there in our boats, running around and catching fish,
Yeah.
No, that's a great idea, and like I have a hard time because I feel like as a bass fisherman, we tend to be more responsible on the water
Yes.
as far as trying to make sure that a soda bottle doesn't blow out of our boat, and but like you go to some of these lakes and they're just littered with beer cans and bait tubs, and like we know that wasn't us, right? And like we're trying to preserve the bass or whatever it is we're targeting because we like targeting them.
Yeah.
And so no, I think that's a great point just to change the image of anglers. Um, but there's that side of it too where it's like, well, why should I have to do that when I'm the one taking care of it to begin with?
I no, I agree, but they always say perception is reality. And, you know,
No, you're 100% right.
but yeah, it's, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely something that, I think we all need, to keep. And you might live on a lake where there's no weeds anyway, and say, "Well, what's it matter?" But I'm just telling you, it's all coming to a lake near us, and I think it's something that we all ought to kind of have in the back of our minds is a real issue that's got to get dealt with at some point.
Yeah. Well, I live near a lake with no weeds, and it's also got no damn bass in
No bass.
it
That's the first thing you fix in Dave. I live on the Ohio River. There's no weeds, and
either.
there's
Right.
definitely no bass.
Right. Well, that's something which I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but like I get frustrated with the stocking programs. They help out with everything but bass, and I know the argument I've heard through the grapevine from some of the biologists is that these smaller flood impoundments that are running up through East Ohio where I'm at, like they don't have the sustainability for more back. There's not enough cover. There's not enough vegetation. But like my thing is like, dude, it's America. We could make the lakes better. Like we could rehab a lake or link up with some big contracting companies and get concrete out. Hard bottom areas, whatever. Uh, but
I'm
again, we sit here and talk about it.
I'm going to tell you firsthand that the number one thing that the Ohio River has, okay? So the Ohio River, as many people know, throughout the 90s, a well-known boat dealer ran a tournament, and they took the proceeds that they made from that tournament plus some, and they stocked the Markland Pool of the Ohio River. And I will tell you from someone who was on the river 4 or 5 days a week back then, it 1,000% made a difference. Now, the state of Kentucky does still stock largemouth bass in the Markland and Meldal pools. And coincidentally, the creeks that they stock those bass in have more keeper bass than any of the other creeks on the river. And something kind of interesting along those lines is they cannot get Ohio and Indiana to cooperate. So if anyone's out there from Ohio and Indiana and has any connections there, that if we could get Ohio and Indiana to get on board with that, it
So it's
definitely
not
would make
legal to stock them.
mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying? It's
There's a guy named Mike McPherson that runs Ohio River Senior Bass. It's I think 50 and older. He does a real good job at that for the seniors to have like a weekday tournament. Well, he told me he's a kind of a scientific type guy. Used to be a professor here at the college here, and he told me that they had to stake. This was like maybe I don't want to get my time frames off, but like it's pretty modern, like within the last 3 or 4 years, right? He said they came to Big Bone. The tournament was out of Big Bone, which if anybody fishes the river, that's kind of midway, between Cincinnati and the dam down there. And they had 40 or 50 anglers that day, and they brought their fish in, and the biologist took scale samples off of the fish. I don't want to say this wrong, and I could check this or something, later, but it was like 50% of the fish that they weighed in were stocked fish. The biologists are able to know that.
wow.
I don't know how they know that or how accurate it is, but that's what the biologist later came and told told the tournament director. So we know on a struggling fishery like the Ohio River that has a lot of spawning, has lack of spawning habitat. That's why the river's tough. Is it fluctuates and there's not much good hard bottom left, so many spawns are inefficient, they don't work. We know for a fact that stocking bass in the Ohio River makes a huge difference. How we convince the state of Ohio, how we convince the state of Indiana and even Kentucky to do more, that's where maybe somebody listening to this, if they have an idea, reach out to me, because I'm very interested in
Yeah.
trying to pursue that, you know.
No, I think that's something we could all get behind, man. And I actually get excited of the thought of like a big fundraising tournament because, dude, I feel like there's a lot of guys that would get behind that. I mean, and throw 20 grand worth of stalkers in a pool. That's going to make a difference.
It makes a huge difference. And from the state's perspective, what they have to understand is that Ohio River has probably got more access for fishermen, than it's the biggest body of water we have. And it's a
Yeah,
love hate thing. I love the river. I grew up on it. It's big, it's wild, it's fun. You
yeah.
run and do crazy things to get back into
Oh, it's awesome.
fish. And
Awesome.
can you imagine the Ohio River, like where you can catch 20, 30 fish a day? Like that's all it needs. They don't have to be 5 pounders. I'd be happy. When I grew up, it was like that. When I grew up, there was plenty of 20 plus keeper days. I'm not
Yeah.
saying they all weighed 20 pounds. It might have been a 6 pound limit, but it was still fish that bit. You know,
Not to cut you off, but like I live on a little river called the Muskingum, and it dumps in the Ohio down here in Marietta, Ohio. And it's a little version of the Ohio. Fish is the exact same, and you can catch 30 Kentuckies, but they're only 10 inches. But what I was going to ask you is like my dad always says how good the Muskingum was in the 90s and late 80s. Like, why was it so much better back then, you think?
I tell you what, in the Markland pool, I really think it was better. Number one, because they had that stocking program that they stocked bass every year. There was a lot more hard bottom back then. There was a lot more hard bottom, places where they'd come in and put riprap. The riprap was fresh. There was
Junk banks and stuff.
a lot more blue clay and gray clay. I don't know if I'm saying that right. That's what we always called it. There was a lot of clay. There was a lot more wood that hadn't broken down that the fish could on the pool. The pools are all aged. Everything's aged. Everything's silted, and it's just hard for those bass to have good spawns. Some people said, I think the fishing pressure used to be worse on the river because I
Yeah,
remember like fishing 150, 200 boat tournaments, and like I don't remember the last time besides a BFL I ever fished anything with a more than usually it's 20, 30 boats, on the river.
mhm,
So I don't think it's fishing pressure. I think it's just lack of habitat and poor reproduction that's led the river to be what it is. But I still love that river, man. It's wild and I still
yeah,
feel like the
no,
river like is still that place. I feel like, man, I've been in every square inch of it, but one year something's going to open up, or some creek's going to become
yeah.
accessible, or
That
I can
the
jump in
river rat
a
thing,
place
yeah,
or something. It's always something exciting to do.
yeah. It gets in your blood, and even knowing you're not going to catch one over 2 pounds, but you'd still rather go there. Which, it's just it's a rivers are there's always an adventure. There's always a target to throw
I've been
at. Like
on
it's just
a
a
lot
fun,
of
fun
adventures
thing.
on that river. Let me tell you
Yeah.
something. And not just the rivers. There's been I don't know. I could tell some stories about that too.
Give us one good one. Maybe a memorable tournament you shouldn't have won, but you won, or a crazy
You
anything. I
want
know
a
you got
memorable
something.
fishing story or memorable boat story?
It doesn't
How
matter
about
to
one of
me.
each? Yeah,
One of
give us one of
each,
each.
unless you're in a hurry.
I'm not in a hurry. I don't know how much time we got, but so I'm gonna tell a story. Okay, so and I don't know. I don't know how much we got. I won't. I'll try to do
You're good,
this.
buddy. No, we're
Okay.
running it. I'm loving the
My
conversation.
my buddy, we always call it the rule number 7 boat. So my buddy, there was a place on the Ohio River that was basically a tube that you had to go through. Okay, and the long story of this was there was like a Wednesday night championship where like no one caught a 5-pounder, and they kept the 5-pounder money all year long. And so they said, we're just going to have a winner take all tournament, 5-pounder. And it's like sweating August miserable, No, not sweating August, like sweating September miserable, just nasty.
Oh yeah.
How are we going to win this tournament? Like you can't, there's nothing to do. There's no pattern. There's no nothing. And I was leaning up against this little boat, okay, and when this light bulb went off, it was like a 12-foot John boat, and I said, this is a little tournament. They don't have any restrictions or rules or anything, as far as boat motors or whatever.
Uh-oh. Think you got a phone call?
Probably.
Did you get a call? Uh-oh.
Okay.
Keep on rolling with
All right. So anyway, we got this little boat, 12-foot John boat. Real quick story was, we go through this place. It was unbelievable. It was a slaughter fest. We went around, made one lap, and had like 18 pounds. Yes, you heard me right. We had 18 pounds. Okay.
Wow.
Major argument with my partner. I said, we can't come in with these fish. We cannot win this tournament with 18 pounds. They'll think God knows what they'll think. I'm not bringing 18 pounds. He's like, what do you mean we're not bringing them in? I said, we're going to start reverse culling. He says, what? I said, we're going to reverse cull. No, I want to show these fish off. We are not showing these fish off. I said, there is a bunch of tournaments here. And I said, we will make a boat to go through this that's tournament legal. So I culled down to like 12 pounds, came in, won 6 or 7 pounds was the closest thing, right? My buddy, this is when I was younger. I was way younger, okay? So he had more resources, but he's like, you know how to talk to everybody. He said, go find me a boat that's tournament legal, okay, and for the BFL, or Redman or whatever they were back then. So I called this place up that made duck boats up in Minnesota, and says they made custom boats and everything. And I said, I need a boat so the whole thing is I needed like a canoe or whatever. I needed a boat that was long enough to be 17 something foot long, legal. It had to hold a 25 horsepower, had to have a kill switch, console, navigate. I had to have all that stuff, right? So they said, yeah, we can make you whatever you want, And I said, okay, that's great. How long would it take? Well, we're 6 months out, okay? So I called my buddy up, and my buddy, he was a guy that he wasn't scared to spend money. And I said, hey, they said you're 6 months out. He said, tell them I'll give them, what do they want for the boat? And it was very, very reasonable what they wanted for this boat, small company. He says, okay. So tell them I'll give them twice that if they can have it done by next Friday. I said, what? It's just a little aluminum boat. I said, I don't care. I said, you're crazy, And so I called them up, and they said, okay. So to give you an idea of the time frame on this was on a Friday. The BFL is on the next Saturday, right? Okay. And he gets this boat built, drives up there in the middle of the night. Okay. I found him a 25 horsepower motor. He goes through there, wins the BFL. From there forward, it's banned, off limits. Anyone that goes in there is a scallywag. It's done. He wins the tournament. Okay.
Wow.
Right. The boat's basically like put up in the yard. Okay. This guy's got coon dogs and hound dogs sleeping in it. Literally. Okay. If you ever been to his yard, fast forward, the boat's useless now because you can't use it because they banned it in all the tournaments. I'm up at Grand Lake St. Mary's. Okay. Years later. I don't even know how many years later it was. And there's a little place up there at Grand Lake St. Mary's. I won't say the name of it because it might be somebody's real special spot, and I don't want to ruin it for them. But
don't want to get it banned.
I have a tournament there Saturday, Sean.
I don't want to violate no information rules. Should I stop? So
no, there's none of them in our club.
Well, this place was normally accessible by anybody and anything. Okay, you could drive in there in a cabin cruiser, right? Well, I'm out practicing, just catching a few fish here and there. I'm actually having a pretty good practice, and I noticed that this thing has been enclosed to build a road. So the canal system, okay, the channels like they have up there, they've got a road going across it made out of riprap so they can work on it, right? It's a temporary thing, right? But they've got a little crack in the wall, right? And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, man, how could you get through that little crack in the wall? And I nose my skeeter up there, and I'm looking at it and analyzing it, and I'm like, and then the little light bulb goes off, ding. I said, well, I bet I could get that little boat in there. So called my buddy. I said, hey man, I said, when's the last time you had that little boat out there? He's like, I don't know, man. It's covered in moss. He's like, you want to buy it? He said, I'd give it away at this point. I said, well, I won't buy it, but I said, can I borrow it? And he's like, well, you are the one that, found it for me and did all that. And he's like, buddy, you can. But he says, this thing hasn't run in months or whatever. And I said, well, I don't care. So I drive up there, right? Drive all the way back to northern Kentucky, and I get the boat, and I get it all rigged up and everything, all right? And here I am, and I got this boat, and I need to describe what this boat looked like to everybody. This is not a bass tracker. This is not a little low roughneck. This is a custom boat, and I don't know what the beam was, but it's basically like a kayak type situation, right? And it's a center console that had like motorcycle seating. Okay, so like you sat behind, because it's so narrow, two men could not sit next to each other, so you sat behind somebody like a motorcycle. Okay?
Had to ride double.
It's got no gunnels on it. The front is just diamond weld, like that diamond. What do they call that stuff? Diamond plate.
Diamond plate, yeah.
It's just rough, but it's all tournament legal. It's got when he won the BFL, it was all legal. They came out and checked it and everything. But I mean, it just looks awful. It's just anyone that would have looked at it would have said, "Oh, there ain't no way you can fish out of that boat, right?" So I get this boat, drive down. I think I had to go and I put new batteries in it. It was a nightmare. I didn't go to bed till 2 or 3 in the morning or whatever when I got it all done. And I got it in my head that And now let me add another point to the story. I took my skeeter home. This is all I got now, right? So anybody been to Grand Lake St. Mary's? It's a little lake, but you all know how rough that thing can get, right? I mean, it gets like
shallow. Yeah.
Well, the wind was blowing as hard as it could blow, of course, scheduled to blow harder. I don't have a choice now because I got this little boat and I got this game plan mindset. I'm gonna slip through the old crack in the wall and to be just dumb bass waiting to impale themselves on my hook, right? So I draw the guy, and first of all, like I show up in the morning, I don't want anybody to know I got it. So like I mean, I remember I was at the gas station. There's a couple guys I knew, and I didn't get gas, and I was like, I ought to fill this gas up last night, so I don't have to get around nobody, and they see what boat they got. And someone will raise, what's he trying to do, and next thing you know, they'll get out of that boat or something. So I pull up. I feel like some kind of thug. I'm at the gas station. I got my hoodie pulled up. It's dark. It's night. I'm sneaking. I'm looking over my shoulder. And I fill this thing full of gas and meet my partner, right? And he was a new co-angler, right? This is his first or second tournament he ever fished. And, oh, I'm excited to fish with you, man. I hear you fish a lot, da-da-da-da-da, man. And, man, I'm looking forward. I hear you got a big old skeeter, man. I love skeeter boats, man. It's going to be so cool fishing out of your skeeter. And I didn't tell him nothing. I just said, well, yeah, I'll meet you at such and such at this time. So he shows up and he's looking around and he sees this boat. And if you could have seen this guy's face, man, it just dropped. And he looked at that boat and he's like, where's your boat? I said, well, we're going to fish out of this thing today. And he's like, is that, is that certified? I said, oh, buddy, it's certified, guaranteed. This thing's wonderful. Look at it. I showed him everything. Got a kill switch, got a back deck, got all these things. I said, okay, I said, we're going to go somewhere exciting today. So we get in this little boat and we have a hard time getting to the spot. It's on the opposite end of the lake from where the ramp was. So I show up. I'm so excited. Just, man, these bass are just waiting to be caught. All I got to do is, this is going to be exciting, Well, sometime in the middle of the night, somehow a bunch of bass boaters figured out how to get in there through a little levee or something. I get there. There's already 5 boats in my little
goodness.
I have to myself, right? So I was like, well, there's a little place harder to get to, and I had to go under a little bridge, and people that live there know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so this thing had this big high center console, right? Again, very basic. Just to give you an idea, stainless steel steering wheel, suicide knob on the thing. Okay, big goofy console, stood up high. And I'm like, I'm gonna try to get this boat under this bridge. At least I have something a little bit. I think someone had gotten underneath there in a bass boat, but I'm gonna get underneath there. So I couldn't get underneath there because the steering wheel was hitting, and I couldn't get underneath there. So luckily, I brought tools. Man, I'm always prepared. So I get in there and I take the little wing nut, the little nut center cap off the steering. I'll take the steering wheel off, take it all off, slide into the promised land. We all caught a bunch of bass. I caught a limit. My co-angler caught a limit, and the wind's blowing and just hissing. And I knew that it was going to be everything that I could do, okay, to get out of there, like to get back to the ramp. And so I left super early, and the live well in this boat was huge. It held so much water. And it was in the front of the boat. It bogged the front of the boat down. I got a 25 horsepower motor. Okay. Boys, I came out of that cut and looked into that wind, and that wind was blowing about 25, gusting to 30, straight down the lake, and it had that lake plumb tore up. I'm talking, I don't know how big they were, but they were Lake Erie waves, okay? So my co-angler and me had a pretty good day today, and he wasn't nervous anymore because, we got along and cut up all day and everything. And he's like, man, I don't know about this. I said, don't worry, man. I've been in worse and in little John boats and stuff. I said, let's get all the weight here in the back of the boat the best we can. I think I can keep the nose up and we'll be all right, buddy. He's like, man, I don't know. He's like, I'll be honest with you, man. I ain't been on a whole lot of boats and this is making me kind of nervous. I said, buddy, it's all right. So we take off, right? And it's like deadliest catch. Every one of them waves is splashing me. I'm getting that blue green, algae water in my face. It's like you're pulling fish out of your beard. It was awful. It was horrible. And I'm fighting for life and limb, and I can't keep the nose up because the boat doesn't have enough horsepower, right? So it's just like getting bogged and swamped, and it's filling full of water, right? And the bilge pump is starting to kind of get clogged because there's so much debris, baits and worms and things that have floated around in this boat, right? I said, you got to help me bail, man. I think we are kind of starting to get in a little trouble. Just maybe not yet. I said, but we could. And he's like, well, what am I going to bail with? And I'm like, took my tackle box and I said, boop, I dumped my tackle box out. I had like a tackle bag. I said, use this. So he's bailing in the back, trying to get it out. Now, keep in mind the whole time, he's riding behind me like he's riding on a motorcycle with me.
Is he holding on?
Like we're an item going down the lake.
He's like bear hugging you.
He's like, man, I don't know about this, man. I'm getting nervous, man. We this isn't safe, man. I don't feel safe. I said, well, buddy, I don't want you not to feel safe. I said, listen, I've been on the water my whole life and I've been in little duck boats and worse than this. I said, buddy, I won't let nothing happen to us. I promise. Everything is under control. And it's like it's like I just said that. It didn't even come out of my mouth. And remember how I told y'all I had to take that little nut off the steering wheel? There's a little key in those steering wheels. It looks like a little half moon. It's the key that keeps the steering wheel from slipping. I literally said, buddy, you got nothing to worry about. And the steering wheel popped off in my hand. Okay? And I looked at him. I turned around and I looked at him. And he looked at me. His eyes got about this big around. I said, okay, we're in trouble now, buddy. This isn't good. The boat turned sideways, okay?
Oh, my God.
I was taking water over the bow. The boat's completely flooded. I can't do anything. Of course, the reality of all this drama is, though, we're in 5 foot of water. The boat sinks, we're going to stand up and walk on the rocks. But it's out of control, okay? I don't know what to do, and I'm like, we're going to potentially capsize. So I looked around. I said, what do I got? I looked around, and I had a pair of vice grips. And I said, oh, perfect. And I took those vice grips, put it on that steering column, and away we went, going down the lake.
Oh, my goodness.
We got in, we pulled into a little golf course pocket, and I'll never forget it. In that golf course pocket, it was a different world, right? The sun was shining, there's guys up on the greens. I'm fighting for life and limb, okay? We're barely making it back in. And I'll never forget, I pull in and And I normally don't get too worked up, and I'm all worked up, and I'm screaming, "We gotta bail, bail, get rid of everything, get rid of all the water, get rid of everything." And these golfers are just like, "Are the fish biting or something?" Real noxious. And I'm like, "Does it look like the fish are biting, buddy? We're fighting for our life and limb." So we limp back into the weigh-in, and I mean, I'm drenched, and I'll never forget. By then, my buddies had probably throughout the day heard the story of what is Sean doing? Why is he in this little boat? I'll never forget. I pulled up, and there's 2 or 3 of them there that already checked in, and I pull off my boot. I'll never forget it, man. I had a muck boot on, and I pulled my muck boot off right in front of them, and I went like this, and water just came gushing out of my boot, and they all just lost it, shaking their heads.
Oh
And
my
no, I did not win
goodness.
the tournament. I think I got a top 10, but it wasn't worth it. But I had that story, and I ended up making a friend that I'm still the guy that's the co-angler is still one of my good friends to this day. He still talks to me, so he
That's awesome.
he got over it. But that's probably one of the crazier boat stories I can remember.
How'd your co-angler do? Did he place?
He got a check to that tournament. Yeah, we both.
Well,
Yeah,
that's worth it for a new co-angler then.
yeah.
Get the ride of your life and cash a check.
You
It
know,
was a drama. It was a big drama. I remember there was all kind of drama about that tournament. The guys, there was not involving me, but there was something about they'd run through somewhere. But I've calmed down in my older years, and I've just decided that it's just better to just sometimes hunker down and fish amongst the crowds and trying to do something dramatic because most of the time that just never works out.
oh man, I wish that was the day of the GoPros. I'd have just loved to seen that fiasco.
But if I'd had a GoPro for half my life, I wouldn't be selling boats for a living. I'd be someone on YouTube. You know what I mean? Getting all kinds of stuff.
I'm just picturing how nerve wracking that would be, just trying to keep your bearings and dude holding on to you, screaming in your ear every time you take a wave.
And then you
God,
turn around and show them the steering wheel.
yeah,
If I could have had a video of that, and I mean, to be honest, how people tell stories and like, well, it probably wasn't that bad. It was probably twice as bad as I'm actually able to tell you on film.
oh, no, I can respect it because, like you said, it's only 5 feet, but it's still scary when those waves are crashing on you like that. Oh
Well,
man, yeah.
chaotic. I don't venture out of my skeeter too often now. I'd rather have the comfort of that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, man, I'll tell you what. We've been on here for a minute. We usually wrap up the show with a good piece of life advice or fishing advice or any advice you would like to give for our audience. If you seem like a guy that's you've been through a lot as a young man, losing your dad, and just you've made the American dream happen, which got all my respect in the world, dude. But give us something you've learned along the way.
man, I'll tell you the biggest thing I'd say if you want, past man, flip that 1099 jig up under the dock, or crank that riprap a little faster. If you want to get out of something a little deeper, I'd say the biggest thing is and it's what I try to teach my kids is I don't care what you're doing. When I say what you're doing, whether you're cutting your grass, whether it's your work, whether it's grilling a burger, whether it's you know, I just try to do anything I do. I try to do as good as I can do and enjoy it the most that I can enjoy it. That's what I try to do, and I'm a big believer in you know you do the best that you can do, whatever you're doing, man. It might not be good enough for everybody around you, but you know what? At the end of the day, if you know that you're doing the best that you can do and you're putting 100% in whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter what everyone else around you thinks. At the end of the day that you put everything into whatever you're doing the best you can, and that's how that's kind of really how I try to do every day.
Yeah, great advice, man. And I think you've proven that concept. So I like it. Cool. You got anything, Aaron?
No, Sean, I mean, we really appreciate you coming on here, and we'll have to venture down your way and kind of check out the shop one day and um, maybe do a podcast live with you or something.
Yeah.
Let everyone see
I
what.
want to hear more of those stories. We could listen to that
You
all
should
night.
come down and do a live podcast in a boat dealer. Doesn't even have to be me. A boat dealership service department the day before Memorial Day weekend. That would be your live podcast. No, I had a great time, guys, and I enjoy watching this myself too. And so I saw one there with Shaw Grizzly. I enjoyed there a little while ago. But thanks for having me, guys, and anytime.
Cool.
Awesome.
All
Well,
right,
we
man.
appreciate you, Sean.
Let's do it again sometime, buddy.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Thanks, Sean.
See you guys.